Hey everyone, quick little update on some of the stuff that I've been testing from the most recent patch note with the Heliostat update. We have a couple bullet points to go through here. No slides today because this is more of like just a casual review of some testing that I've been doing because people have been asking me about a lot of different stuff. So yeah, let's just get started. So obviously Warlock turrets, this was a very highly anticipated change. They now scale with your grenade stat. Now, I had some questions, and obviously some of you had some questions, similar questions as well, about the turret changes. The first thing is ignition scaling. So some grenades, they proc ignitions, right? Like fusion grenades, for example, with Starfire, 2 nades with ashes, you get a nice little ignition. We know that scales already, right? However, Hellion, because it's now counted as grenade damage, does the ignition from the Hellion projectiles scale with your grenade stat? The answer is no. Unfortunately, no. And so if we go ahead and go to my boss damage spreadsheet here, and we go to the sustain tab, we scroll all the way down, go to the tick area, you'll see Hellion here. Let me go ahead and stop highlighting here. Hellion with Ember of Ashes. There's another Hellion entry up here for Eunoia. And you'll see that the value that I've assigned to the 200 column would normally be 1.65. So you can see with Arc Soul, it's 1.65. However, with Hellion, I've set it down to around 31% for regular Hellion. And then with Eunoia, it's around 31.5%, a little bit different because you get ignition in 2 shots, but you also have these other projectiles that scale as well. And so in reality, unfortunately, Hellion is only getting around a 30, 31, 32% buff from what would normally be a 65% buff. I don't know if this is intended or not. Certainly, dampens the effect of this buff on Hellion in general. Certainly, I do think Hellion is quite valuable for a Solar Warlock to have on for a number of different reasons, which we're going to get on in a couple seconds here. But just wanted you to know, no, Hellion ignitions do not scale with the turrets over 200 grenade stat. Shatter scaling, you might have been wondering, okay, Bleak Watcher, if you forcefully shatter a target that's been frozen by Bleak Watcher or you let it automatically shatter, does it scale past 100 grenade stat? The answer is also no, unfortunately. The only thing that gets increased is, of course, the actual Bleak Watcher projectiles, which, that's not a lot of damage, so I don't think you should be running 200 grenades specifically for that. Next, we have Fragment and Mod Synergy. This one's a really big one. There's a ton of fragments, armor mods that are all affected and have a condition that you need to do grenade damage in order to activate them, or get a grenade kill in order to activate them. And now, because all of these turrets are coded as grenade damage, they all trigger them. So stuff like Spark of Shock, stuff like Ember of Resolve, stuff like Facet of Dominance, mods like Ashes to Assets, Firepower, all sorts of things like this, they all work with all of your turrets now. So, for example, Arc Soul can jolt if you have Spark of Shock on. That's pretty cool. Your Hellion, whenever it gets kills, it will give you Cure if you have Ember of Resolve on. So, pretty cool stuff. Definitely a very nice quality of life buff. Not really one that I was thinking about, but definitely a nice quality of life buff for turrets. Unfortunately, and we'll talk about this in a second here, or I guess I'll talk about it now. The main problem with turrets is not that they're not very potent. I mean, they're fine, right? They're decent. They're good for keeping up Devour, for example, on the Getaway Artist build and stuff like that. Good for like passive gameplay and good for more passive like chip damage, tick damage playstyles. The main problem with turrets is that a lot of them are attached to subclasses that do not contain a fundamentally important role that you need to fill in endgame content. So for example, Well Warlock right now and Strand Warlock are both 2 of the best subclasses for day ones and stuff like that, because Well provides Well, and Strand Warlock is like the best damage subclass right now because of access to stuff like Thread of Ascent, and you have a bunch of Threadling spam with Weaver's Call, you have Pack Tactics, Needlestorm is a pretty good super, etc, etc. So the unfortunate thing is that, Prismatic Warlock, which is like the best turret spammer build in the game, doesn't really provide the same utility that something like a Strand Warlock does. So it's nice. These are nice quality of life changes. I don't think they're necessarily going to shift a lot of what people use in endgame content. Certainly it's nice to experiment. I think maybe the biggest change will be the next bullet, which we'll talk about in a second here. But the first thing to talk about, I guess, is Hellion, right? Hellion, people are probably going to use that 4th fragment slot that's not 100% needed, right? Because normally you run Singeing, you run Torches, you run Benevolence, and that 4th slot, you can spend it on Ashes, you can spend it on Solace, you can spend it on Searing. People spend it on different things. But I think now, if you're taking Hellion, a lot of people are probably going to spend it on Ember of Resolve. So that's, I think, a change that people will make. But besides that, not too much to talk about. The 4th bullet I want to talk about is Allied Arc Soul. So 2 questions you might have. Allied Arc Souls, number 1, if your ally has 200 grenade, does it boost their Arc Soul damage? The answer is yes, it does. Number 2, the amplified arc soul effect, where if you have amplified, your arc soul shoots, I think it's 5 projectiles instead of 3, and it's also at a faster rate, increases the DPS a lot. Does that work on allies? And me and my friend Spider, we tested this today. Yes, it does. So the question is it maybe worth bringing an arc warlock for a day 1 or for a DPS check, something like that? And the answer is, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to experiment. But on its face, I do think it's pretty good, right? So if you look at here, Arc Soul, Amplified, Facet of Courage. Facet of Courage is like 10%. You can knock it off if you want. This would end up at somewhere around like 450 or something like that, right? So 500, effectively, 450 to 500 extra DPS for free for your entire team. So what does that kind of equate to? So earlier, before I was making this video, I was looking at some of the popular damage options. And I'm just going to go right for the gut, right? You have New Malpice, which is at 3.3k. And then you also have Mint Retrograde with Honing times 5. That's at 3.5k, right? So the DPS of pretty meta DPS weapons is around like 3k to 4k. So like 3,500, right? And if you take 500 and you divide it into 3,500, the damage increase is like, it's like 14, 15, 16%. So it's pretty solid. It's pretty solid stuff. And that's the equivalent of having someone on like Assembler or, you know, something like that pretty much, right? Or having like Sanguine on. So it's free extra damage. And, you know, you could always put your Arc Warlock on like Assembler Emp. You can have them on Geomag. So you're not necessarily losing a ton compared to like a more traditional damage setup involving Thunder Crash or Strand Warlock with Needle Storm. So definitely something worth considering. And honestly, in speedruns, maybe we'll try putting Arc Warlock on for some stuff. So it could be potentially pretty interesting. Excited to test out, you know, Arc Souls. And I did notice, by the way, when I was doing damage with Arc Soul and doing some testing, it also gives like a pretty decent amount of super too. So yeah, pretty exciting to talk about Arc Soul and maybe test out Arc Soul, having an Arc Soul. Maybe in 3-man content, not as worth. But certainly in 6-man content, especially with how much Ionic Sentry and Arc Souls have been boosted to now be able to jolt things, definitely potentially usable in a day 1 context, maybe with Vesper of Radius on. So interesting stuff. The last 2 things you might be asking about when it comes to turrets is Verity's Brow stuff. So number 1, does Verity's Brow correctly boost turret damage? Yeah, it does. Okay. And then number 2 is, will Verity work when you have mismatches on Hellion? Right, so this is a very specific question, but I noticed somebody had it in another server that I was in. So what I'm talking about here is Hellion is obviously solar damage, but what if you don't have Healing Grenade on Prismatic? Yeah, it still works. So if you get Strand kills and you have like Threadling Grenade on and you have the Death Throws meter, your Hellion will do more damage. So it's not like, it doesn't have to be solar, if that makes sense. Okay, so yeah, that makes Prismatic Warlock, I guess, a little bit more easy if you want to use Verity's Brow for some reason to boost your Hellion damage. Okay, next up we have a couple weapon-specific buffs and new weapons. So Spreadshot hand cannons, because they got like quality of life nerfs in PvP to handling, range, stuff like that, I think, their damage was buffed to compensate, right? And in PvE, they also received this buff. It was around 6.3%, which was not really needed in PvE. So for reference here, if we go to my Endgame analysis tab here, I have a bunch of different weapons, a lot of numbers here. But to make things simple for you guys, I made this add clear score. It's like a summary score for primaries, right? And I also added rocket sidearms. And if you take a look here, the difference between spread shots, which exist at an add clear score of like 1100, which basically is an analysis of how well they do minor DPS and elite DPS in typical scenarios, the gap between them and all the other primaries is very, very high, on top of the fact that their range is like maybe a little bit better, or like, you know, comparable to sidearms and stuff like that. So you're seeing some very, very high performance here, and the buff was not really needed for PvE, but I mean, yeah, it's not a really big buff, so it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but it will help when it comes to, you know, doing Lucky Pants DPS, and it's also great for ad clear. I mean, I don't think this is going to change any thresholds or anything. It's like a 6% buff, but it pushes spread shots into being the best hand cannon archetype even more than they already are. Okay, so there's that. Next up, Heavy Burst Sidearms. I think these were nerfed for maybe PvP reasons. It was like around 6% damage nerf. If we go ahead and we filter by sidearms here, because you guys might be curious, does this make Heavy Burst Sidearms significantly worse than other sidearm archetypes? I believe Heavy Burst Sidearms were the premier sidearm archetype in the game when it comes to raw, like add clear score DPS, or it was Adaptive Burst or Heavy Burst. They were very similar. And now that's kind of knocked them down a peg, right? So that they're kind of similar to Adaptives and Rapid Fire sidearms now, except they have a burst, so you kind of have to play around that if that's not something that you prefer. And Adaptive Bursts are now handily the best sidearm archetype in the game, when it comes to just raw minor DPS. As you can see here, 868 ad clear score. Everything else is sitting at 780 down to 717. So yeah, that is it for sidearms. I mean, it doesn't really change much. I think people still just use sidearms based on roles and not, archetypes too much, but that is something worth talking about. Wolfsbane, new exotic axe. A lot of people have been asking me about this. There's been a lot of content produced about this. Very unique weapon, very cool weapon. I like it. It's a unique weapon. Is it good for boss DPS? The answer is no. This thing, no matter how you slice it, really, it's just not very good. There is one kind of caveat that I'll talk about. But first, let's go over its damage profile, right? So Wolfsbane, there's actually two ways you can use Wolfsbane that kind of makes sense with how the exotic works. The first way that you use it is, let me go ahead and show you. It's, I'll call it Wolfsbane spam. Okay, so this is the spam method where you just use the axe. You activate Nano Assault, you smack the boss, you do light, light, heavy, and while you're slamming, by the way, you want to be holding a directional key in order to ensure that your slam can come out quickly. So if you do it really, really fast here with really, really good timing, your last hit here, you see how it says 729, 583, you can get both of them to be like empowered hits. So you can have the Nano Assault timer for all of your light attacks if you do heavy, light, light. I was a little slow here, so that's fine, whatever. And then after this, you spend around 20 light attacks, approximately 20 light attacks, getting your full bar back, right? So you're sitting here, chop, 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 chop. And then eventually you get your bar back, you reactivate, and then you slam again. Okay, so that's the first way that you can use Wolfsbane. The second way that was pointed out to me by someone in my DMs, I forgot who it was, but shout out to them. The second way you can do this is by activating Nano Assault. And when you activate Nano Assault, you can slam and instantly... Oh, okay, this is actually not the clip that I was looking for. It might be this one, sorry. Yeah, so you slam, and then you instantly swap off the axe. And when you swap off the axe, it's kind of like... I think Ravenous Beast has a similar mechanic where you have a meter, and when you swap off the weapon, it cancels the duration of your effect and refunds some of your bar, depending on when you canceled. So if you instantly swap off the second you slam and you create those cyclones, you get a big refund of your meter, and I believe the cyclone contributes some of these nanites as well to fill up your meter, and then you can start hitting the boss again. And if you do this, you can actually indefinitely hit a boss with this axe over and over and over. And you can see here that I get enough ammo. I get 14 ammo here. On average, I think I needed 11 or 12 hits, maybe even 10 sometimes, to get my Nano Assault meter fully charged. So you actually just don't need to, like, you can just do this repeatedly. You never run out of ammo, right? And this is on the most ammo hungry configuration of this axe, right? You could theoretically have even more ammo if you use different blades. I had the honed jagged combo that this thing comes with out of the box, okay? So those are the two ways that you can use this weapon. Now, when it comes to damage, I have some unfortunate news, right? So first of all, even if you use this weapon with the Nano Assault method and you do like heavy, light, light, and you do 20 lights to regenerate, so you're really focusing on using Nano Assault as much as you can, the DPS of this thing is at 2.9k, which is, if we remember, New Malpais is at 3.3 and Mint Retrograde is at 3.5 with no assistance from New Gear bonus or from seasonal mods, okay? So that's not very good. The total damage, 140k, that looks pretty good. However, when you look directly below this weapon, you see Gold Tusk with a suboptimal damage perk, and you're just spamming light attacks, and the DPS is effectively the same, and it's 171k total. And then when you look at actual competitive swords, which are even further up than this, you have adaptive swords, you have Bequest. The DPS, it's not even close, right? It's not even close. So that's like the higher DPS method of using Wolfsbane. Now, the lower DPS method of using Wolfsbane, where you could theoretically just do damage indefinitely without ever running out of ammo, 1.9k, right? That's not very good, right? I mean, it's decent for an infinite damage option, but when you consider that you have like primaries, exotic primaries, PK, SMG, stuff like that, sitting at 2.2k, sitting at 2.3k, sitting at 2.4k, etc., going up and up and up, it's not very impressive, right? So does this thing have any redeeming qualities when it comes to damage? Well, there's two things I want to talk about that might make it have some sort of redemption in the future. So the first thing is, what about the DPS of just doing the first 10 seconds of Nano Assault? So you activate Nano Assault and you just go crazy ham. And obviously during that period, you get the empowered light attacks, you get the big cyclones. Is the DPS during this period very high? And the answer is, well, I'll show you. We go to Wolfsbane here. The DPS during this period is 3.8k, which is fine. It's okay. I mean, it's higher than Mint Retrograde, but after that, you're basically sitting there with a limp axe with no charge, and you've got to figure out how to do damage elsewhere, like somehow, you know, in another way, right? So the only thing I can really think of for this is if somehow this weapon can kill Crota, like regular Crota, in 10 seconds without needing any help from other weapons, like after the fact, like maybe Thunder Crash into just spamming Wolfsbane with, you know, Nano Assault, then this could be potentially better than a legendary sword if the boss literally dies in that 10-second window, right? Which maybe is possible these days. We have, you know, weapon stat, we have all this stuff these days that's like pretty power crept. You have really high damage supers, so maybe this could be good for Crota, right? If you can melt him in that time. However, you know, as soon as you leave that 10-second window and you just need to start wailing at the boss with the light attacks, your damage is just gonna fall off a cliff. It's gonna fall off a cliff, right? So that's unfortunate. Also, pro tip, this weapon does like kind of piercing through enemies. So, you know, capping to 60 and looking straight up, really helpful for not piercing through enemies when you're trying to build your nanite stacks back up. And then the second thing I want to talk about, or I guess technically 2.5 things, right? So someone told me that when you're in a fire team and you're building nanite stacks, your fire team mates nanites contribute to your meter. So I was thinking, oh, maybe this is just like a really good fire team weapon, and it stacks up really fast when you're in fire teams, and you can get the nano assault much faster, and it's actually viable for DPS. No, unfortunately, no. I got a bunch of my friends to smack a boss with me, right? And look at my meter, right? It's taking me approximately 20 hits to fill up my meter, and as you can see, you know, that there's no contribution from my teammates, right? I'm not sure if maybe there's some healing contribution, like their nanites help heal you and you get a little bit more survivability that way, but in terms of damage, I don't think there's any benefit here from having teammates near you that are, you know, potentially giving you nanites. Doesn't happen. Okay, so the second actual thing that I wanted to talk about is future testing, right? Because this weapon, it has a recursion catalyst, which if you take damage has a chance of producing nanites. So maybe it produces a lot of nanites when you take damage, or maybe if it's a boss that has a damage over time tick pool underneath you, it can produce a lot of nanites, and then maybe the DPS will be better. However, I don't think the DPS is going to be so much better that it's going to eclipse stuff like Bequest and stuff like, you know, Synancia when it comes to sword DPS. So unfortunately, I don't think this weapon is really not a lot of hope for it. The total damage of Wolfsbane also did not account for using Relentless Strikes. So in the future, Relentless Strikes could make this thing an option that's like a middling sword DPS option that's a little bit worse than your typical legendary sword with Pack Hunter, but you know, in exchange, you can kind of have way more total damage because of Relentless Strikes. So we'll definitely do some calculations. We'll do some testing when these catalysts become available. I'm sure you guys have tried Attrition Orbs, which appears to be very powerful on this weapon, because a lot of the time when weapons have like a lot of tick damage, Bungie scales back those weapons and gives them custom tuning so that the regular Attrition Orbs formula doesn't overpower the amount of orbs that are produced by the weapon. I mean, you saw this with like Area Denials, for example. Swords, Bungie has balanced the number of hits required by a sword to produce an orb with Attrition Orbs around the fact that swords don't really have multi-ticks, right? You just hit with the sword. But then you have stuff like wolf packs, which count as sword hits. And now you have a weapon that can produce this Cyclone, and this Cyclone has a lot of ticks. And I'm sure you've probably seen clips at this point of people using an Attrition Orbs Wolfsbane to make like 6 or 7 orbs or something from like a Cyclone attack. So that's a thing. It's cool, I guess, but it is like an exotic heavy. So if it was like an exotic special, then I would be like, oh, that's cool. I mean, like you can make a lot of orbs for your teammates in XY niche scenario, but it's an exotic heavy, and it also requires you to get a lot of hits in order to fully stack up your Nano Assault. So I don't even think that utility from the Attrition Orbs, making a bunch of orbs very quickly, is going to be even used in stuff like speedrunning. So yeah, for that reason, Wolfsbane, it's cool concept, cool to like, you know, skate around with a little bit, but it's not particularly great for damage. I mean, I could be wrong. We'll see when, you know, more catalysts come out, but for now, not very impressed. Okay, Warlock base grenades, a couple things to talk about here. Yes, Warlock base grenades have an additive 5% to them. When Bungie says additive here, by the way, it's a little misleading. Okay, not really on their part, but it could be misleading. It could be misinterpreted, right? Additive here, what I think it means is I tested Warlock grenades, right, on and compared them to like Hunter grenades in the same conditions, with like Verity and Courage and stuff like that. And even with multiple like multipliers, it's still 5% across the board compared to Titan and Hunter grenades, right? So you can just think of it as Warlocks do 5% more grenade damage versus Hunters and Titans. The only place where this additive kind of thing comes into play is grapple melees, right? Verity is obviously like an additive thing, I guess, like melee effects. So I guess what they're saying here is that for the purposes of grenade meleeing, they become like an additive buff, right? They get added to like the melee stack when it comes to grenade calculations for specifically grapple melee. Okay, so I assume that's what additive means here for all other intents and purposes, because you're usually not grapple melee on Warlock. For all other intents and purposes, you can just think, yeah, Warlocks are doing 5% more, exactly 5% more. Okay, so I did confirm that. Okay, a couple small notes that don't really deserve like a huge, deep dive or anything. Axion bolts got buffed so that when you charge them, they detonate twice. Could potentially be good for ad clear because a big problem with Vortex Grenade and high level content is it does take a long time to like tick ads and really kill them. Whereas Axion bolts, the explosiveness, the instant burst, could potentially be better for like proccing Devour and stuff like that. And of course, I think you get a double charge as well these days compared to like Vortex. So, potentially pretty decent, but not for DPS. Not for DPS. The damage of each Axion bolt, even accounting for both detonations, is not enough to overpower stuff like Touch of Flame Fusions, Touch of Thunderstorms, Touch of Thunder Pulses. However, another grenade that we're going to talk about right underneath this is Scatter Grenades with Chaos Accelerant. So these did get a large buff, and their damage per nade is actually now higher than Touch of Flame Fusions with Ignitions accounted for. So Scatter Grenade Chaos Accelerant grenades, I just said grenade twice, Scatter Grenades with Chaos Accelerant, they do 13.5% more damage per grenade compared to fusions. And if you use something like Nothing Manacles with Chaos Accelerant, you don't need the charge time anymore. You don't need to overcharge your grenade anymore. And so you can just spam 3 of these in a row and do pretty decent nade damage. So that is potentially interesting. Obviously, you need to be on True Void, which is not necessarily the most viable subclass these days. But if you need debuff extension or something and you want to add in some free total damage, this is like an option that exists now. Not a horrible option either, I would say, but nothing to write home about, I guess. But, pretty decent. And then for reference as well, if we're looking at the grenade hierarchy, which if you're interested, you can go to my boss damage spreadsheet, go to the swap tab and filter by grenades on your own copy, and you'll see what I mean. But in the grenade hierarchy right now, you have fusions, then you have pulses, and then you have storms above those. And solars are like conditional, right? Because it depends on boss model and they do damage over a really, really, really long period of time. So scatters kind of slot in above fusions and below pulses, right? Obviously with the relevant touch aspects involved, right? So 8.2% below pulses, 13.5% above fusions, just like an interesting option. Okay. All right, next up, base melees. Not really much to talk about this. Titans do more base melee damage. This has been a thing for a long time. Not really much to talk about here. Howl of the Storm. Okay. So Howl of the Storm, from what Spider has told me, right? Spider has done some testing of his own. He's in chat right now. Apparently the super stat works and the melee stat doesn't do anything. And I believe Synthos also work with the crystals that are produced from Howl of the Storm Glacial Quake. I'm sure lots of you have seen Howl of the Storm in the firing range against Riven, against Wrathel, first boss of Warlords. And a lot of people have probably seen that, this thing does crazy DPS right now. I assume it'll probably get nerfed in some way. Not really sure. But yeah, Howl of the Storm now produces 8 crystals instead of 4, and you can just spam it in the super. And Spider is also telling me that the super Howl of the Storm does way, way, way more damage than regular Howl of the Storm when you're out of your super. So when you're out of your super, it's probably more productive not to spam Howl of the Storm and to just use other super generating weapons so that you can get a second Glacial Quake as quickly as possible. All right. Alethanim rotation. So you might be reading this and being like, what? Alethanim was not changed across this patch. What are you talking about? So this is pretty interesting. Zero Worldline, or someone in his team, shout out to him, he brought this forward to me. But there is a rotation, a damage strategy that you can use that involves using Alethanim and a rocket, right? And the way that it works is you shoot an Alethanim into the boss, and then you use a rocket with Wolfpack rounds and speed loader slacks to basically go rocket dodge, rocket dodge, rocket dodge. And then presumably your energy weapon could be like an area denial, it could be a fusion, whatever you want, really. Just anything in your energy slot, right? Now the problem with this is that Alethanim is quite annoying because when you shoot a brick and you have maybe four, I think you need 4 people to have infinite rocket ammo to do this repeatedly. And the problem with the Lethanum is obviously when you shoot a brick, your teammates have to walk over to pick it up, right? And that would be quite annoying during a damage phase. However, marksman dodge, now reloads all of your weapons, and also it also picks up ammo nearby, right? So that makes this a lot easier, right? I think Zero, he told me he was using a gravity well weapon in his hand in order to vacuum the ammo near him. But now you don't need gravity well anymore. You can just dodge, right? So this is potentially interesting. I'll certainly test this. Much harder to test than a normal damage rotation because you need a bunch of people doing it. But in theory, you could have 4 speedloader slacks hunters, someone on galley, and you would have 4 of them on a Lethanum, and they would just be dumping rocket, and then they'd be shooting an Lethanum brick at the ground, dodging, they'd all pick up rocket, over and over and over again. So, interesting stuff, right? You could do it with Heliostat as well if you maybe don't want to use speedloader slacks, you want to use like a better damage exotic or something like that, maybe Nighthawk or something, Star Eater, whatever. So yeah, a Lethanum rotation, pretty interesting stuff. We'll try it out. And then next we have Weave Walk. If you haven't seen my YouTube short, which I think a lot of people have seen recently, but Weave Walk now makes you way more horizontal on its enter and exit animations. And if you want me to describe how Weave Walk kind of skating works, it's very similar to those of you who have tried maybe Heat Rises, Icarus Dash with Strafe Glide. If you do it across a long distance, you can activate it twice and just go really fast and build up momentum like that. Weave Walk's enter and exit animation feels like Heat Rises Strafe Glide. That's what it feels like. Okay, so it's very horizontal. You can sword skate and then just immediately activate Weave Walk and deactivate it when you bounce off the ground, and you get a lot of speed. So just look up Weave Walk skating. It's probably on YouTube somewhere. I don't know. You might have seen it. You might not have seen it, but it's going to be there if you're interested in that. We have On Your Mark. On Your Mark was changed to now stack on precision hits, and it has a 1-second internal cooldown. I measured this using a trace rifle. Some people are complaining about the 1-second internal cooldown. I really think that's a pretty short cooldown, to be honest with you. It just makes it so that you can't stack to 10 using like a trace rifle like instantly, pretty much. But yeah, On Your Mark, you can stack it pretty quickly, and in regular content, once you have 10 stacks On Your Mark, it gives you Cure every single time you get a kill. So it's like pseudo Devour kind of, you get 50 HP every single kill. That's pretty decent, right? Makes Solar Hunter, sorry, a lot more survivable on top of having access to Resto and stuff like that. And you can use a solar weapon with Empyrean, something that people have done before on like Sunshot on Solar Hunter in previous like challenges and day ones and stuff like that. So definitely something to consider. And then the flip side of that is obviously Prismatic Hunter has DR and stuff like that. So people are probably not going to get off of Solar Hunter for that specific reason. But there's also a team buffing utility option with On Your Mark as well, which provides stats to your teammates. And when I say stats, I mean like reload and handling and stuff like that. But also provides plus 50 weapon at max stacks to your teammates. So if your Solar Hunter is on Div, or if they're on Lucky Pants, or really anything that's capable of critting, I mean, the timer's like 12 seconds or something. So as long as you are getting literally 1 crit every 12 seconds, which I feel like if you're playing Hunter is like pretty reasonable ask, right? So you can provide all of your teammates with plus 50 weapon. And so I think on day one, a lot of people do have very high weapon stat, but not a lot of them are running 200 weapon, right, necessarily. So maybe Solar Hunter is like a nice way of providing a little bit of damage increase. But again, so the way to think about this is Bungie is now introducing a lot of ways for people to take non-standard subclasses in order to buff their teammates' damage by a little bit, right? So you have Arc Soul, you have, in this case, plus 50 weapon from On Your Mark. And you have, there's been other cases of this in the past as well, like Assembler Rift, right? And all of these are like little ways of bumping up your whole team's damage by a little bit. Now, Arc Soul, like we discussed, is typically a 15-ish% increase to everybody's DPS. On Your Mark, even if you go from 100 to 150 weapon, or 150 to 200 weapon, and you're not wasting any of this 50 weapon stat, at most, it's going to increase your damage by what, like 5-6%? If you're doing special weapon damage specifically, it's going to be maybe 6-7%, right? 7-8%. And that's assuming that all of your damage comes from weapons, when in reality, you're increasing your damage through grenades, through supers, through not just weapons, right? And so your actual damage increase overall from this is probably going to be maybe around 5% by having someone on your mark on your team. And that assumes that you're not at 150 weapon, that you're not at 160 weapon, 170 weapon, etc. Like going into those points where the 50 weapon would be wasted. So definitely interesting. But I don't think it's going to be like a class leading option that people are, jumping out of their seats to really try to implement into team strategies. especially given that Solar Hunter is significantly more vulnerable compared to, you know, Prismatic Hunter. Okay, and then finally, we have Golden Gun, Deadshot, and now refunds instead of on ignitions, on kills. And I know in PvP, there's like a diminishing timer where like every time you get a kill, it refunds less and less of your super duration. But apparently in PvE, at least I saw like a llama clip on Twitter, I think, where the timer doesn't really seem to like ever end if you keep getting kills. I don't know if eventually it drops off very significantly after you've killed like 20 or 30 ads or something like that. So that is something to be aware of maybe. But yeah, this is a good orb generator, I suppose. I don't know if there's like I'm pretty sure there's a cap to how many orbs you can make off of one super. But I'm not sure if that applies to Golden Gun Deadshot over that period of time. I have no idea. But it seems like a decent way to make orbs. Big super orbs, of course. If that's ever something that's needed in a specific encounter or something, just like saving up super orbs or something. That's on the table, I suppose, as well. I mean, you can kind of already do that with Golden Gun Deadshot, but you know what I mean. Okay, that is pretty much it for this video. Over the next couple days, I will be revisiting base value testing. I have finished a lot of the exotic weapon base value testing in the weapons tab. I hope to be rid of these old weapons tabs, old abilities tabs in the near future, but it will still take a lot of work. I am, as you can see, revamping these weapons tabs, going through them and retesting everything with a much more precise method. So I'm excited to be able to finish this, hopefully in the near future. And after that, we're going to do probably some damage rotation stuff, but oh man, dude, 200 stats, all this stuff, man, like, damage testing this season is definitely a lot more complicated than before. But yeah, I'm excited, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a little, you know, touching on all these different little changes that Bungie has made. A lot of really cool changes, really exciting changes, and you know, enjoy playing the game with, you know, new turret changes and all this stuff and the new axe. Goodbye for now.